Is Ben 10 as great as we remember? Today, the quest to answer that question continues with Ben 10's third season as I make my way through the rest of the OG show. If you haven't seen the previous parts in this video series, links are in the description. Let's jump right into it. Going into Ben 10's third season, I had a couple big hopes. First, I wanted to see how Ben had changed following his revelations at the end of the previous season. Second, I wanted the show to do more creative things with the watch and continue to craft compelling, snappy conflicts around it. However, I will say that at this point in the story, I'm looking for something more. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the previous episodic plots have been plenty of fun, but there were also a lot that I looked at and went, At this stage in the game, I'm hoping that the show has found its footing enough that we no longer get those somewhat mediocre conflicts. And also, the alien gimmick was able to carry some of those for me at least a little bit. But now, well, I've seen these aliens quite a bit. I know what the watch is basically about. So less creative conflicts aren't really gonna cut it anymore for me. I'm looking for more from this show so that it can keep me engaged with a mostly episodic plot, or possibly, maybe we'll even pull from season 1 and have a bit more of a consistent arc for Ben. Actually, speaking of that, another thing I want to see is these changes sticking for Ben. As I've said previously, I'm someone who really cares about how characters change across a series and about maintaining those changes. So if Ben forgets some lesson he's already learned, or if we reset his character, I'm gonna be pretty annoyed. Putting all that aside though, I'm still going to try and stay open to the show surprising me. For all I know, maybe they'll do something totally different from what I expected, but I'll end up loving it all the same. But here's the good news. Season 3's first episode is a great sign for things to come. We begin with Ben and Gwen arguing because Ben didn't get a cake for Grandpa's birthday. His response to Gwen,
excuse me, full-time hero here. When do I have time to go get some dumb old cake?
But then a future version of Gwen appears to take Gwen away and Ben chases after them. Here we're introduced to a future Ben as well, and this Ben is very different from the one we know. He's extremely serious and has no fun anymore. He doesn't even name his aliens. On top of that, he's more or less abandoned his personal relationships, only talking with Gwen briefly and not saying a word to Grandpa. There's a very real sense that he's so focused on his duty to the world that he's forgotten how to connect with those closest to him. That by spending so much time as these alien heroes, he's lost what made him human in the first place. However, when Vilgax returns, even future Ben is unable to defeat him. Vilgax knows what each of his aliens can do and he counters their attacks. But then Ben says something to his future self.
He may know how all your aliens fight, but does he know what Ben Tennyson can do? I just hope after all this time, you haven't forgotten too.
From here, we see that green flash of future Ben transforming into an alien hero, except that he hasn't transformed into an alien hero. He's turned back into his human self. From here, he surprises Vilgax, gains the upper hand, and saves the day with the help of his friends. After this, it's time for Ben and Gwen to return to their time period, but not before future Ben gives him a mysterious gift. What is it? Well, when they return to Grandpa for his birthday, it opens up and reveals a cake. The cake Ben had almost forgotten to give him. Out of all the moral lessons in this show so far, this is probably the one that connects with me the most. There's so many different layers to it. There's the idea that even hyper-focusing on something seemingly good can lead to losing sight of the things that you care about. There's the sense that past Ben has developed so much that now he can teach his future self a new lesson. There's the cake symbolizing how no matter how busy we get in our lives, we shouldn't discard the people we love and the people who love us. Because that cake wasn't just some dumb old cake. It was a gesture of love for his grandpa. And all of this is wrapped up in a conflict where we get new designs for villains, bombastic fights with fresh aliens, and a look at a future Ben learning to make time for those he loves again. This is easily one of Ben 10's best episodes yet. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the next episode. Here, Ben is hypnotized by a supervillain who uses his aliens for nefarious means. When this guy eventually hypnotizes a mall full of people, Ben then has to fight to free them all. Now, this episode isn't terrible, but it's another one that's just kind of there. Watching it once is fine enough because it moves from scene to scene pretty fast. We get to see lots of aliens, but beyond that, there isn't much to dig into here. Personally, I would have loved to see Ben get a bit more worried for Gwen and Grandpa when they get hypnotized. That would have been one way to give this conflict more emotional depth. Or maybe the antagonist could have been more unique. After all, so far, I think every main baddie has been a through and through villain. None of them have noble motivations or an overall good reason for doing what they're doing, even if they're going about it the wrong way. To be fair, villains who are bad for the sake of being bad can be a lot of fun, but we already have plenty of guys like that. At this stage, why not change it up a bit? Either way, the next episode has the potential to do some pretty neat stuff. This time, Charmcaster accidentally switches bodies with Gwen, resulting in Gwen being trapped in jail and Charmcaster trying to fool Ben and Grandpa. But here's my problem. Charmcaster hasn't gotten any more interesting to me. She's still a pretty generic, bland villain, though now she has some terrible dialogue where she narrates what we can already see happening.
Come into my parlor, said the spider to the stinkfly.
Maybe that was supposed to be her new quirk to differentiate her from the crowd, but yeah, not a fan of that. Throughout the whole episode, we don't really learn anything new about her, despite spending a good deal of time with her. The real frustrating thing with this episode, though, is how easy it is to imagine a more compelling version. Like, what if we went for a more emotional conflict, where Charmcaster starts off trying to trick Grandpa and Ben, but after spending time with them, she begins to appreciate them. After all, we already saw that her family seems pretty awful, so maybe this could have been a moment where she could grow, or she could reject that change, and then it would feel a bit tragic. Or alternatively, what if this body swapping gimmick went absolutely buck wild? Maybe Hex gets involved and we've got Grandpa, Gwen, Charmcaster, Ben, and Hex all jumping bodies due to the spell going haywire. That's probably enough fan fiction though. My only point is that it's so easy for me to think of ways to push this concept further, and yet the show does so little with it. Gwen doesn't really do all that much in prison. Charmcaster's relationship with Ben and Grandpa doesn't develop because of their interactions, and the body swapping gimmick is only used for the very first swap, and then at the end when Ben and Gwen switch bodies. I know a lot of my complaints with this one are related to what could have been, and to some that might seem unfair. I mean, I should look at what's here, right? But my issue is that what's here, it isn't much to me. It doesn't connect, and I can't help but look at it and immediately think about all the other things they could have done. Next up though, the Christmas episode. Here, the gang ends up in this Christmas land of sorts, and soon, Grandpa's enlisted as the new Santa Claus by the villainous Mr. Jingles. At the same time, if Ben and Gwen stay here too long, they'll be trapped as elves forever. Now, I will give this episode one thing right away. The concept of Grandpa being Santa is inherently funny to me. This poor guy with his big belly and his red shirt just immediately forced to act as Santa, it got a couple decent laughs out of me. Other than that, the main way this episode attempts to make you care is with this elf who tries to help Ben and Gwen. In addition, there's a change of heart for Mr. Jingles. Unfortunately, while I appreciate these elements being here, this is another one where I just don't know enough about these characters to care about their growth. Like, okay, this guy named Mr. Jingles learned the incredibly cliched true meaning of Christmas message, but who is Mr. Jingles to me? Well, he's not really anyone. He's just some guy who needed to learn a really obvious lesson. Meanwhile, the elf who helps him says some odd words that confuse the kids, and he's all around a nice dude, but that's about it for defining character traits. It's not like this is terrible. I mean, I prefer having these guys in the episode to not having them at all, but I just wish there was more going on here. And unfortunately, the next episode isn't much better. This time, Ben is hunting an alien werewolf of sorts, but then he starts transforming into one himself, and he needs to act fast. Additionally, Ben meets this girl named Kai, who he's really into. For me, this one fails on a couple really basic levels. First off, there are a couple ideas that are brought up only to be discarded. For example, we see that women in this culture aren't allowed to go out and hunt or do certain things, and this gets a decent bit of emphasis, but then we just never come back to it. Okay, I thought we were gonna use that for something. Meanwhile, and this is the bigger one, Ben and Kai seem to get along decently when he's human. In fact, he even saves her life as a human, but when he starts transforming into a werewolf, she looks like she's having a terrible time dealing with him. However, at the end, when he's transformed back, she instead says that she only liked Ben when he was a werewolf because she felt like she could tame him? What? No, that's just not true. You can't show me that she's super annoyed with him, then turn around and pretend the exact opposite was the case. I don't believe that. And since this little relationship between them is a big focus in the episode, this is a pretty large issue. Other than that, I guess we get some decent little fights and stuff like that, but it was nothing to set it apart from other better episodes in this show that we've already seen. And the next episode is the same kind of deal. This time, Ben and Gwen are transported into the Sumo Slammer video game where they'll need to fight their way out if they want to survive. Remember how I said I wanted to see how Ben had grown as a character this season? Well, at least in the little moments, it really doesn't seem like he has. He's still a brat, and he cheats when his cousin beats him. And that might sound like a small thing, but at this point, I want to see a Ben who I can root for. the one I find likable, and these small moments don't help anything. Plus, he spends the whole time obsessing over gaining this video game character's admiration, and... Listen, I get the idea here. Ben has his blinders on because he's hyper-focused on this guy. Then as the episode progresses, he snaps out of it and remembers that actually acting like a hero matters more than the recognition. Fair enough. But we've already had arcs somewhat similar to this, and beyond that, I can't help but spend this whole episode agreeing with Gwen. Ben is being really dumb. And yes, I know people can be dumb. Who do you think's talking to you right now? But my complaint isn't related to realism. It's related to wanting the show to try new things, to push itself further, and to just not recycle so many ideas. Ben should have seriously developed by now, not just regressed. Now, I should still give credit where credit is due though. The show does some interesting stuff with this video game gimmick. Like we get to see this Japanese-inspired world, and we haven't seen anything like that yet in this series. There are also unique enemy designs, these alien tokens Ben has to pick up, Grandpa pausing the game and helping them fight. All of these lean into the episode's central conceit, and even if I think they could have pushed this a bit further, I still appreciate what's here. Regardless though, for me, these strengths can't quite save this episode from mediocrity. Unfortunately, the next episode is far worse though. See, the gang has gone to this amusement park where some shows are filmed, and Ben is going to meet his hero, Kangaroo Commando. At the same time though, Ben is mad because his animator has stolen his aliens' designs for a children's cartoon. Let's start with Ben. Ben is awful this episode. First, he has this obsession with gaining Kangaroo Commando's admiration, which in and of itself would be fine. This guy is his hero after all, and we see him saving people. But the problem is that Ben throws so many of his good traits away in pursuit of this guy's acceptance. Mainly, this comes up with this animator. See, the animator is very obviously framed for blowing up an amusement park ride, and Gwen is quick to notice that it probably wasn't him. So she defends and advocates for this guy because otherwise he's going to get in deep trouble for something he didn't do, and someone else who's actually dangerous will still be on the loose. Ben's response? He gets mad at her, like really ticked off. I really didn't think that he would still be this selfish and self-centered, especially when so many episodes have focused on him learning to be less selfish and self-centered. I mean, if he's just going to be like this, what was the point of all those episodes? Sure, this episode has some alien fights and all that, but none of it is all that fresh or new. Like, sure, I guess these could be fun if this was the first episode I saw, but this far in? Well, it doesn't have anything too elevated above previous fights, so in the end, I would rather just go watch another episode. At least the next episode is a bit better. Here, after Grandpa gets tired of Ben and Gwen ignoring their chores, he takes them to a farm to learn the value of a little hard work. However, it quickly becomes apparent that something is wrong. A mummy-like alien is on the loose, and it's hunting for an extremely dangerous energy source. This episode does have some fun moments. After all, the obvious arc here would be that Ben and Gwen learn to love working at the farm, or at least they appreciate their time there. But no. Instead, we get a genuinely funny punchline where Ben and Gwen beg to not go back there, and Grandpa says,
"Oh, thank goodness. I'd forgotten how much I hated working on Uncle Jedediah's farm when I was a kid."
The unexpected nature of this anti-message got a good laugh out of me. Beyond that, though, it really doesn't have much going on. Oddly enough, I started off thinking it would, because in the opening scene, we see this farm boy being made fun of and bullied, so of course I go, hey, I guess we're going to learn more about this guy this episode, or maybe he'll grow because he sees Ben and Gwen fighting. But no, nothing happens with this kid. He exists as little more than a tool to tell Ben and Gwen where they need to go next. I would have loved for him to take the role of the side character who receives a bit of development, like Steel or the Champion from Season 2, but that's just not the case. This isn't a terrible episode or anything, but man, I just really wish there was more to dig into here. Anyway, on to the next episode. This time, the Little League World Series is coming up, and Ben realizes that the team he would have been playing with if he hadn't gone on this road trip have managed to make it in. Ben is understandably a little disappointed by this. He feels like he's missing out, but he's also annoyed because his bullies are on the team now too. However, they're facing off against the Squires, a team that is far from normal. In fact, as Gwen quickly realizes, they have an almost perfect all-around record, which should be impossible. So something is suspicious here. On a logical level, this episode's really silly because the villain's plan just doesn't make much sense. After all, the Forever Knights have made this team out of robots because they know the president will come to see this game. Then they'll use this opportunity to kidnap him, make him a robot, and control the country. A bit of a roundabout way of doing it, but whatever, I'm still with you. But then we learned that they named the robots after some of the greatest players in history? Why? Wouldn't someone notice that? Actually, how is Gwen the first person to realize this? Additionally, if this is the plan, maybe don't have them play and win in such superhuman ways. That might give it away. But these things honestly aren't a huge deal for me. Now, my real problems come here. This one tries to teach Ben the very in-depth message that you shouldn't cheat, kids. The way we go about this is that he starts off the episode using gray matter to count jelly beans at the carnival and win a music player. But the moral message is somewhat murky because it looks like the carnival is cheating too. So in my mind, Ben's cheating really isn't all that big of a deal. I think this would have been a good opportunity for another anti-message, but the episode decidedly doesn't go that way, with Grandpa ending off by saying that Ben didn't deserve that music pocket. Maybe my morals are skewed here, I don't know. I just don't think it was that big of a deal that he cheated a cheating carnival out of a music pocket. Alright, so that's a little bit of an issue, but what about the character stuff? Ben having to inadvertently help his bullies win by stopping the robot team might be cool, right? But I didn't really feel much from this. This isn't treated as much of a conflict at all. Maybe if Ben had opened up to Gwen and Grandpa more about how these bullies affected him, it could have landed more for me. Actually, they could have gone the opposite direction and have this really cathartic moment where Ben looks at them and says, I don't care about you anymore. I've grown past you. But I didn't get any moment like that, at least not one that connected with me. Overall, this is another mediocre, bland episode that honestly, I would have rather skipped. Now, if you've been keeping track of these episodes, you might have noticed something. We aren't doing great. I only liked one episode so far, and the rest have been, at best, mediocre for me. But it can't stay like that, right? I mean, of course it has to get better. Right, Ben? Right, Ben? Right, Ben? No, things are about to get worse. Way worse, because Ben himself is about to become absolutely insufferable. If one thing has remained true throughout the show, it's that Ben has an immense amount of respect for Grandpa. Sure, sometimes he can be a brat, sometimes he can make mistakes, but he definitely looks up to Grandpa, especially following all the plumber stuff. Heck, we had a whole episode where that was a huge focus. So now what are we gonna do? Well, over the course of the next 4 episodes, we're going to take something that has been consistently likable about Ben, and we're gonna change that, baby. Yeah, because now it's time for Ben to learn some lessons about respecting Grandpa. Oh, and Gwen too, because it's not like we already did that at the end of the last season and at multiple other points throughout the show. Anyway, this episode is... well, let's start with the positives. There's a cool weather-based battle that's pretty fun. I mean, Ben rocking it out, shredding the guitar. It's really extra in a way that I like quite a bit. Also, Accelerate playing the drums is great. Fun times. But these good bits are easily overshadowed for me by the other parts of this episode. This time, the gang is at a music festival that Grandpa is really stoked for. But Ben doesn't care. He wants to be at some sumo slammer event. And it would be one thing if he was just a bit disappointed, but instead, he is such a jerk to Grandpa.
What's more important, getting a new Digi download or some sea alien trash that I kick butt on, or staying here just because you say so?
Hey, the Shank Carpeting autograph booth. So who wants to come to the booth with me?
I'd rather brush Vilgax's teeth with my tongue than wait in line to get those fossils autographs.
Could you be any ruder?
Now, some of you might be thinking something like, Loar, Ben is a child, an actual child. Why are you surprised when a child acts like this? All right, you straw man that I created for the sake of convenience. First off, I don't care if he's a kid. Being a kid doesn't work as an excuse for me because, sure, kids can be annoying and I'll definitely give them more leeway with their mistakes than adults, but they don't have to be. The writers chose to make Ben a brat here, chose to have him backpedal on previous lessons, chose to take one of the few things that I could like about him and make me go through this lesson just for him to basically return to the status quo. If you enjoy this, then that's totally fair. But the idea that Ben is going to act this way because he's a kid, or that it inherently justifies this conflict, no, not for me. Unfortunately, the next episodes are just as bad. This is the first 2-parter in the series, and boy, oh boy, does it drag. Again, that's mainly because of Ben. Ben is awful here. Remember how he learned to respect Gwen more and how he's always respected Grandpa? Scrap that. That never happened. Now we're about to see him learn that lesson again, folks. Woo! Because at the start, he's acting like a complete jerk for one reason. He sees himself as the one true hero in this group.
Ben, Gwen and I can help.
It's funny, Grandpa.
Oh, what's that? Oh yeah, we did this before. As he says after they possibly save his life.
No offense, but you guys were just on cleanup. Everyone knows my aliens lead, you and Grandpa follow.
Ben, what? Where's this coming from? What happened to those lessons you learned at the end of season 1 or the end of season 2? What happened to your personality, Ben? What changed, Ben? I need to know, Ben! Damn it! Here's what makes this even worse. This isn't just a lesson that Ben already learned. He's now more wrong than he's ever been. Because Gwen isn't just a bit more clever than him now. No, she can use magic, something that is incredibly useful and that he cannot do. It's such a shame too, because if it weren't for how absolutely awful Ben is in this episode and how annoying it is to see him regress, I could see myself enjoying some of this. Because Ghost Freak is back, baby, and he has a horrifying plan that will basically result in the destruction of the whole world. Also, the groundwork for this was laid in previous episodes, so there's a neat aha moment where everything starts clicking together. But I just don't care. I can't bring myself to. Any potentially cool ideas are marred by Ben's attitude, by the fact that I can't stop thinking, wow, I wish we had a different main character. Or maybe we could just have the Ben from the end of season 1 back. That'd be fine. I didn't mind that kid. In fact, I thought he was pretty cool. But alas, we're stuck with this guy. I mean, Gwen and Grandpa consistently prove their competence this episode, but still, Ben treats them like crap. And the end of this stupid retreading of old lessons that Ben already learned, the end result of this regression in his character for 40 minutes, the way he makes up for it.
I still say things would have gone a lot smoother if you two just let me handle everything myself.
So, after all that, how do they go about wrapping up this conflict for Ben? Well, he says,
All right. I guess we are pretty good at kicking butt together. Team.
No, Ben. Not team. Not team at all. Remember in the first season when Ben showed genuine remorse after the Kevin incident? What happened to that? When did we lose sight of these characters so thoroughly that this is Ben? Really, Ben isn't back to where he was at the start of season 1. He's worse, and I don't know why he's regressed so much. But guess what? The pain train continues to chug along mercilessly because the final episode of this season really isn't much better. Here, the gang has returned to the place where Grandpa met his wife, and it's clear that he misses her. Gwen is quickly able to pick up on this, but Ben? No. As he says,
How can Grandpa be lonely when we're around him all the time?
Ben, even you can't be that clueless. Following this, an alien appears who Grandpa's got some interest in, if you know what I'm saying. But Ben is not having it. He goes really far here. I mean, he absolutely can't stand this woman, and there's really no reason for it outside of the fact that he's being a bit possessive of Grandpa, which, if this was one of his few faults or something, sure, that's fine. I could get behind that conflict. But when we keep having additional ways that Ben sucks, I just want to grab him by the shoulders and shake his little body and tell him to stop the madness. And just I want a different protagonist. Please give me a different protagonist. But there's still some potential, because we learned that this alien woman was the one who sent the Omnitrix to Earth. Why? Well, because she wanted Grandpa to get it, but it was slightly off course, and then Ben got to it first. I really, really like this. The writers took what I accepted as a simple coincidence and gave it a plot-based reason that makes perfect sense because of Grandpa's past. Awesome. However, the thing I'm really interested in here is Ben's reaction to this. I mean, he's tied up so much of his self-worth in this watch. So what happens if he starts to feel like maybe, just maybe, him even getting the watch in the first place was a huge mistake? After this, Gwen sits down and talks with Ben, trying to comfort him. It's a nice moment for her, and that's it though. The episode barely stops to focus on this before we're back into the action, which, yeah, there's a new alien, so that's neat, but still, this is another case where I can see so much potential for Ben, but it's basically being brushed aside. Really, there's a great idea here, but the execution is very lacking. Now, I gotta be fair, so I'll give the episode this. At the end, Ben genuinely apologizes to Grandpa, and he says that his happiness is the most important. Basically, if Grandpa wants to leave with this alien woman and be happy, then he should do it. In and of itself, this is a nice moment. I appreciate that Ben actually seems to have remorse for how he acted and that he's willing to make a sacrifice. But it's hard for me to take this all that seriously when Ben has already walked back on so many of his supposed changes. Really, the idea that Ben is going to retain any of these lessons is starting to feel like a bad joke. To some, my annoyance with this season might seem overblown or ridiculous, but it doesn't come from a mean place. I'm ticked off because I wanted to enjoy this. I saw a lot of potential for interesting conflicts, for growth, for creativity to shine through. Heck, this season's first episode had me really excited for where things were gonna go. So I'm just disappointed. Disappointed that Ben is getting worse, that villains aren't improving, that the watch isn't being used in as many fun ways, that somehow, despite its awesome promise, this show is more often boring than it is exciting for me, and more often frustrating than it is compelling. None of this is to say that you're wrong if you enjoy these conflicts for other reasons, but all the reasons I enjoy stories, this show lost most of them this season. And honestly, now we're at a point where I just don't trust the show. When there are the inevitable conflicts based on Ben learning something in season 4, I'm going to be stuck going, is this a real lesson? Or is he just going to forget it in an episode or two? I do not have high hopes going into season 4, but that doesn't mean I'm done. Nah, I need to finish this journey through OG Ben 10, and despite everything I've said here, I'll try my best to keep an open mind. After all, I've seen this show succeed, so who's to say that it couldn't succeed again? Maybe, just maybe, the last season will be so good that I can say that this show was as great as we remember. Either way, thank you so much for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it despite my very negative tone, and I hope you'll stick around for the next episode in this series. Thank you to my wonderful patrons whose names are scrolling on by. Thank you to you once again, and I hope you have an awesome day.